Welcome to NextLabs Expert Q&A Series. This series was designed to inform you of relevant cybersecurity topics via expert knowledge.
Welcome back to the NextLabs Cybersecurity Expert Series. In this episode, we have our guest Nazia Sharieff, an information security lead, joining us to discuss supply chain attacks, how they work, and how to defend. Now, Nazia will introduce herself before we move into the Q&A.
I'm Nazia Sharieff. I have over 16 years of experience in governance, risk, and compliance. I'm currently working as an information security lead at a leading organization here in Qatar. I started off as a software engineer, and then I moved into consulting, and from there I transitioned to governance, risk, and compliance. And currently my work involves cybersecurity, audits, risk management, and compliance. And I'm happy to be participating in this series with NextLabs.
Thank you for your introduction, Nazia. It's great to have you here today. Let's start by discussing how supply chain attacks work and why they have become a preferred method for cybercriminals targeting organizations.
Supply chain attacks target an organization's weaknesses. So basically, what happens here is these attackers, instead of directly attacking the organizations, which has become tough today, they try to attack the suppliers or the vendors or the partners of these big organizations. So they infiltrate through the supplier software. They try to get into the supplier network and install these malicious softwares, either through the supplier software, or they could also get in by tampering the hardware or by other means. So they look for weaknesses or vulnerabilities with the partner or with the supplier. And through the vendor weaknesses, they try to target these big organizations. And these attacks have become pretty common today, like I said, because most big organizations have a very secure framework, and it's difficult for them to usually infiltrate into the big organization's network. And so they are looking for alternate channels, and which are usually these weak pathways through the supplier or the vendor. That's how they infiltrate into the big organizations. And we've seen multiple attacks in the past. A lot of these attacks were channeled through the suppliers and vendors.
Thank you for the insightful response. Now, moving on to our next question. What recent high-profile supply chain attacks have exposed vulnerabilities in major industries, and what lessons have been learned from these incidents?
Like I mentioned, we had one of the famous attacks that we had was the SolarWinds attack, where the network was breached. There were significant vulnerabilities which were again exploited by these hackers, and that is how they managed to infiltrate into their network. So some of these incidents and a couple of other incidents that we've had in the past few years have definitely shaken the industry and have put big organizations on alert, because though these are small vendors, so-called partners are small software companies, they are interconnected to the big organization's network, and hence the breach in the partner has led to a bigger breach at the organization. And some of the key lessons that we've learned from some of these attacks include that we need to do constant monitoring of third-party risk. Now, third-party risk management was there, and it is an essential element of cybersecurity management. And we've seen that some of these standards, such as NIST and ISO 27001, they mandate third-party risk management. So supply risk management was a key part of compliance as well as cybersecurity management. But the emphasis now is to have continuous monitoring of third-party risks, to monitor the supplier's network, to have security requirements in place, to include the security requirements as a part of compliance. Then we need to include security requirements such as the right to audit, to be able to audit these suppliers' security practices? Are they compliant with local laws and regulations? Do they have any certifications in place? So that is one way of vetting the supplier before onboarding them, and also to do continuous monitoring. So in case of these attacks, it so happened that the attack had taken place a long while ago, and the attackers had infiltrated into the network, and then they managed to move in laterally and breach through the major organization's network. But the attacks were actually discovered only after some point. This is because of traditional incident management. If continuous security monitoring was being done and attacks were being detected on real time, then the lateral movement could have been stopped and this attack could have been mitigated at an early stage itself. So, and also what's necessary is that organizations implement zero trust architecture. So basically to have MFA in place, multi-factor authentication, even for both internal as well as external entities. It's not only necessary for internal entities, but also for the external vendors. And to also ensure that, we have the vendor listing out all possible dependencies that they have. Like if you are procuring a software from a vendor, it's highly recommended that you ask for all the interdependencies, what softwares they are dependent on, and what kind of security practices they are following, and what kind of compliance they have, and security controls they have in place.
That gives us a lot to consider. Now, let's delve deeper into this topic. What best practices should organizations adopt to strengthen their defenses against supply chain attacks, particularly in managing third-party risk?
I mentioned a few of the factors before, like we need to have a proper patch management process in place with rapid response. So not only do we need to have like a patch management policy that ensures that critical vulnerabilities and updates are applied on time, but we also need to make sure that after the patching, monitoring is done, and ensure that these vulnerabilities are correctly patched. And as I mentioned, zero trust architecture, ensuring that you're not trusting anyone, whether it's an internal entity or an external entity, or if you have a long-time trusted vendors, you ensure you have the security controls in place, you have compliance requirements in place as a part of your agreements, as a part of your contracts. You have the necessary security requirements. You can put in clauses such as I mentioned earlier, a right to audit clause, and you can ask for security certifications, whether they're ISO2 compliant, ISO compliant. So this would ensure that your partner or your vendor is trustworthy. In addition to this, it's also important that third-party risk management is done. You do a regular audit or review of the vendor, and any risks are highlighted and monitored and mitigated on time. And yes, so these are some of the practices that can be put in place, best practices which can be put in place in order to ensure that such attacks do not happen. And also continuous monitoring, real-time monitoring, like I mentioned, of the threats, and to detect any anomalies in the network, and to mitigate those attacks, so that we do not have a late response, and we take actions, or we do an incident response after major damage or a major breach has been done.
Those strategies are vital for enhancing our defenses. Building on that, how can organizations ensure the security of software updates and patches to prevent supply chain compromises?
Firstly, in order to ensure that the software patches are applied correctly, and to mitigate any supply chain attacks, we need to have the patching policies, the patching process in place, and we need to prioritize the deployment of critical vulnerabilities and critical patches. And not only is it important that we roll out these patches, and but also that these software patches are tested in controlled environments, and first the organization has to deploy them across the organization and ensure that these patches are working. And if there are any issues, they would have to address it. And also they would have to ensure that they do post-installation monitoring. Basically, after an update is deployed, they would have to look out for any kind of unusual behavior, or sometimes because there is a possibility that there is a vulnerability even after applying these patches. Usually the infiltration happens when there is a patch that is applied through the vendor, and the patch is like infected with a malicious file, and so this gives the attacker a way to enter or reach into the organization's network. So yeah, a robust and effective and continuously tested and monitored patch management process is one of the ways in which we can ensure that the software updates are applied on time. And then again, also to ensure that least privilege and segmentation is ensured. That is granting third-party vendors very limited access in case they are going to be applying any software updates or they're going to come over to patch your systems, then you give them as limited access as possible when you role-based access, or you implement access control based on their roles. So, and you also segment the network and make sure that they don't have access even if they are getting into a network, they have very limited access and they are not able to access the critical systems, and that the critical assets and systems are separated from the vendor network. So that's one way of doing it. And then, of course, another way of ensuring that the software patches are installed on time is to stay up to date, to stay connected with the updates from the vendor, to demand updates on latest releases and latest patches from the vendor. So there are times when we might not get timely updates from the vendor. So it becomes the organization's responsibility to follow up and demand these patches and updates and make sure that these are applied on time. So it's necessary to be part of, to collaborate and to stay informed and to be part of these, groups or advisories. Like you have risk advisory groups, local advisory groups who would inform you. And in every country, like here we have, and the National Cybersecurity Agency, which informs us continuously about these critical breaches that have happened. And these days, it's a small world. So if there is a breach or an attack in one part of the world, so it's usually the communication goes out and the vendors would announce and they would let know that there's a breach that has happened, and then that all organizations who are using this software should take the necessary measures in order to mitigate this.
Thank you, Nazia, for sharing valuable insights on the growing threat of supply chain attacks and how organizations can strengthen their defenses. And with that, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned to the next episode where we will have more insights from a new expert.